My name is Mildred Whitaker, and the last time someone underestimated me, a whole school board had to rewrite their safety policies. But this time it wasn't about textbooks or unruly teenagers. This time it was about fire, and the quiet way they hoped I'd vanish in it. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because what I'm about to tell you, you might actually regret missing out on. They assigned me room 312B at Meadow Lane Care on a Tuesday. The nurse said it with a painted smile. "You'll love it. Private corner unit, very quiet." Very quiet turned out to mean at the end of a long, dark hallway where the motion sensors sometimes forgot to turn on the lights. It took 5 minutes for anyone to respond to a call button, and if you didn't shout, they forgot to bring you a fork with your meals. I used to run a school. I remember inspecting cafeteria floors and fire exits, ensuring 100 things were in place, just in case something went wrong. So I noticed the details here. The flickering light above the entrance. The dented baseboard. The silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like forgetting. Still, I tried to stay grateful. I could move on my own most days. I kept a journal. I did the breathing exercises from my physical therapist. I played solitaire on a tablet my granddaughter gave me for Christmas 3 years ago. And I observed. My neighbor across the hall, Muir, Leeds, got extra pudding every lunch. His daughter visited weekly in silk scarves and whispered into her phone. Another woman, Eloise, had fresh flowers on her table every morning and a visiting beautician every Thursday. Me. I got mail from insurance companies and robocalls asking if I wanted to extend my vehicle's warranty. I wasn't jealous. Not really. But I was curious. Why the difference? One night, I wheeled myself down the hallway to refill my water from the lounge. That's when I noticed it. The rooms on the east wing had wall sprinklers above each doorway. Small round discs with metal arm safety I knew well from all my years conducting drills. I wheeled myself back to my own room, looked up. Nothing. Just a cracked plaster ceiling. No sprinkler. No red casing. No in case of fire plan posted on the wall like the others had. The next morning I mentioned it to Nurse Jaime. "Oh, don't worry about that, Miss Whitaker," she chirped. "That side of the building is newer. But you're totally safe." I raised an eyebrow. I was a principal. I know what a fire code violation looks like. She just laughed, scribbled something in her chart and walked off. 2 nights later, the fire alarm went off at 2:15. It was faint, not even in my hallway. No flashing lights. No announcement over the speaker system. Only a slow, repetitive beep, like a dying smoke detector. I pressed the call button. No one came. The alarm eventually stopped on its own. The next morning, I asked about it. "Oh, the toaster set it off in the break room," someone said. One of the aides was making a midnight snack. Right. Except there was no smell of toast in the air. And if there had been smoke. What about my room? What if it wasn't toast next time? I asked again about the sprinkler system. This time, the administrator got involved. A man in khaki slacks and a golf shirt, who looked like he should have been selling timeshares, not running an elder care facility. "We conduct monthly inspections," he said smoothly. "Your safety is our top priority." "Then why does my room have no fire protection?" I asked. He looked down at his clipboard. "Your room's in a low-risk wing." "Honestly, ma'am, our data shows that residents with mobility challenges typically don't survive evacuations anyway." The words landed like glass breaking in my chest. I stared at him. "You're telling me you didn't install a sprinkler because you didn't expect me to make it out?" He gave me a pitying smile. "I'm just being honest. We do our best, but resources go where they have the most impact." I wanted to throw the chair. Instead, I thanked him, returned to my room, and wrote down every word he said in my journal. I added a copy to my file folder. I took a photo of my ceiling, then of Mr. Leeds's ceiling, then of Eloise's. The contrast was undeniable. The protection, the care, the response times, they were not equal. And maybe they weren't meant to be. I stopped sleeping through the night after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the smoke curling beneath my door, the slow suffocation. I imagined fire eating through walls while no one came because someone had deemed room 312B low priority. I wasn't afraid of death, not really. But I was furious at the idea of being erased quietly, as if I were some faded curtain in an old house. Flammable, unnecessary, and already forgotten. They thought people like me didn't notice. But I had spent decades noticing everything: missing pencils, missing kids, missing policies. And what I saw here wasn't just neglect. It was something more calculated. I started paying attention to who got what and why. The woman 2 doors down, Esther, had a leaky ceiling. Maintenance showed up 3 days later, fixed nothing, and said it was condensation. She didn't have any kids listed in her file. Just a pension? Contrast that with Mr. Leeds, who once rang his bell because his soda had too much ice, and someone brought him a fresh one within 5 minutes, complete with a bendy straw. Mr. Leeds's daughter is on the donor board. Another resident whispered to me during bingo. He's got money. They treat him like porcelain. And us. We were chipped mugs, useful but easily replaced. I started mapping the entire floor on paper. Where sprinklers were located, where alarms were visible, where lighting worked or didn't. It was like drafting blueprints of inequality. I asked around subtly, "Do you feel safe here?" I asked Ruth, a retired librarian with a spine curved like a question mark. She frowned. "I try not to think about it. What's the use? When you get to this age, people stop seeing you as someone who might be rescued." That line stuck with me. Someone who might be rescued. 2 weeks after the fake alarm, I was in the dining hall when Eloise complained about the food being too salty. Within minutes, her plate was replaced. The cook even came out and apologized. That night, I asked for a blanket. Mine had grown thin and frayed at the edges. The night nurse blinked like it was the first time anyone had ever made such a request. She said they were short on linens but would put me on the list. It never came. I slept cold and angry, clutching my robe tighter. Then came the staff meeting. I wasn't supposed to hear it. It was behind a slightly ajar door. But my wheelchair rolled quietly, and their voices weren't exactly subtle. "Room 312B is getting demanding," one said. "Keeps asking about inspections. She's a former principal." Another laughed. "Let her write a report. No one's reading it." Then a third voice, quieter male, maybe an administrator. "Don't waste time there. Just keep her files updated for liability. If something happens, we'll say she refused evacuation. Happens all the time." My hand froze on the wheel. They already had the story planned. They were ready for a fire. But not to save me, only to explain me away. I backed away from the door before they noticed. That night, I stared at the ceiling again. Still no sprinkler. Still no safety. Still no concern. Only expectation. That I'd die quietly and conveniently and they'd move on. The next morning, I rolled into the East Wing to check on the newer residents. It smelled like lemon disinfectant and fresh carpet. Sprinklers in every room. LED exit signs. Emergency lights at every corner. And behind the nurse's desk, a laminated map labeled Priority Response Plan. I studied it like a test I intended to ace. There were colors: green, yellow, red. Room 312B. Not on the map at all. My pen shook as I circled the entire area I lived in. Invisible. Forgotten. Unprotected. I rolled back into my room and opened my old email account. It had been months since I'd touched it, but I remembered the password. Whitaker 1964. I typed a name into the inbox search bar. Susan Darrington. Susan had been one of the school board lawyers I worked with, sharp, strategic, and deeply principled. She'd once gone toe-to-toe with a state senator about school zoning corruption and won. Her last email to me 3 years ago had said, "If you ever need someone to raise hell, just ask." So I did. Subject: urgent life safety violations at Meadow Lane Care. Body: "Susan, it's Mildred. I believe I'm in danger, and not just me. There's something wrong here. I have photos, notes, and recordings. I need you to see this before something happens." I attached photos of the ceiling, the map, and a scan of my floor sketches. Then I hit send. I didn't know what she'd do, but I knew what I wouldn't do anymore. Wait. 3 days passed before I heard back from Susan. Her reply was short. "I'm coming. Sunday. Don't speak to anyone else." That was all I needed. I printed the email and tucked it into my pillowcase. Not under inside, just in case they searched. A trick I'd learned back in the days when some of our students were wrongly accused, and teachers needed to protect them until the truth came out. Until then, I kept pretending. Pretending not to notice how the nurses gave me plastic cutlery when others had silver. Pretending I didn't hear the murmur at the medication cart. "That's the fire lady." Pretending I didn't see the clipboard left unattended with a sticky note reading, 312B, review eval, non-compliant. But most of all, I pretended not to notice the second alarm. It happened again. This time in the West Kitchen, 11. 36p. Me? A faint pop and a sizzle like a microwave shorting out. Then the low mechanical beep. Again, no flashing light in my hall, no announcement. But something was different this time. I smelled it. Burnt plastic, sharp and bitter, drifting through the vents. I pressed my button. Nothing. I knocked on my neighbor's door. No answer. I rolled down the hall toward the front station. No one. I saw it then, smoke rising thinly from the crack under the kitchen door. Just a whisper curling like a question. Still no alarm in my hallway. No staff running. No rush of footsteps. The red exit sign flickered half dead. The door at the end of the corridor was locked. Panic hummed like static behind my eyes, but I pushed it down. I turned around and rolled back. To my room. To my bag. To the folder. I grabbed my fire mat, pressed the button again, and then I waited just 30 seconds. No one came, so I moved. I turned left instead of right toward the older section where few still had visitors, where most rooms were occupied by women who didn't speak much anymore, or spoke only in whispers to husbands who'd been dead for years. And that's when I saw her, Mrs. Abbasi. She was standing at the window in her nightgown, frozen. Her eyes were locked on the hallway lights. They'd gone out. The power had glitched. She didn't move. She couldn't move. She had a walker with tennis balls on the front legs and knees that clicked like a metronome. I rolled up beside her. "Fire," I said gently. "We need to go." She blinked. Again. I didn't have time to explain. I took her arm and helped her into my chair. I walked, pushing her and dragging her walker behind us, one uneven clatter at a time. We made it to the east wing just as the overhead lights flickered back to life. That's where I saw staff running now the evacuation had started. Not in my hallway, not near my room, but where the donors lived, where the sprinklers worked, where the new mattresses had flame-retardant tags. They passed me without a glance. Two aides brushed by us like we were part of the wall. I shouted, "She can't walk on her own." Nothing. One of them called back over her shoulder, "Stay calm and wait for assistance." The hallway filled with smoke. My legs ached. My fingers were numb from gripping the handles. And yet, we made it to the glass double doors that led to the courtyard. Fresh air hit us like a slap. "Mrs. Abbasi wheezed. "You're a miracle." I shook my head. "No, I just paid attention." Once we were both seated outside on a bench wrapped in the emergency blankets they finally offered, I looked around. The facility's administrator was on the phone, pacing, eyes wild. Other residents stood in clusters, confused, trembling, wrapped in cheap foil like leftovers. And someone, a young woman in scrubs, stood at the edge of the crowd, crying. I watched her. She noticed me, and after a few seconds she came over. "I saw your email," she whispered. My breath caught. "What?" "I'm friends with Susan's niece. I used to intern at her firm." She glanced around, then pulled something from her pocket, a flash drive. "They know about the sprinklers. There's a spreadsheet. Rooms with no protection. Marked by residency expectation metrics." Residency expectation. She nodded. "How long they expect a resident to survive. They prioritize upgrades based on it." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not from smoke this time, but from fury. "How long they expect us to survive." She nodded. "They run the numbers, like it's math. Not people." I looked down at the drive in my hand. It was warm from her pocket, and it was heavy, not in weight. In truth, by morning, the incident had already been rebranded as a minor kitchen malfunction. They handed out pamphlets with cartoon fire extinguishers on the front and calming phrases like, "Your safety is our mission." I watched a nurse tuck them into every resident's drawer, even those too blind to read. They tried to carry on, as if no one had nearly choked on smoke, as if the alarms hadn't been selective, as if I hadn't pushed a woman to safety while staff tripped over their own radios. But I wasn't pretending anymore. I had the drive. I had Susan, and I had a plan. Susan arrived the next day wearing a steel gray blazer, practical walking shoes, and a look on her face that made orderlies step out of her way. She didn't hug me. She squeezed my shoulder. That was better. We sat in the outdoor patio by the koi pond, the one they always showed prospective families during tours. The one they didn't clean unless visitors were expected. I handed her the flash drive. Room metrics, I said. They called it residency expectation. Yee. She didn't flinch. She just opened her laptop, inserted the drive, and began scrolling. Her jaw tightened. "This is illegal," she muttered. "And if it's not, it's unethical as hell." I said nothing. "I need copies of everything you've written, photographed or recorded." I handed her the folder I'd kept under my mattress, the one labeled Room 3112B, proof they were waiting for me to die. She flipped through the documents. Ceiling photos, floor plans, a printed version of the administrator's quote about not surviving evacuations, time-stamped screenshots of fire alarm failures. When she looked up, her eyes were different. Not the tired lawyer eyes from before, but sharp, courtroom-ready. "You still have the fire map?" I nodded. "Good. We'll need to prove pattern, disproportionate risk, targeted negligence." She leaned closer. "And Mildred, this isn't just a lawsuit. This is a case study. This is precedent." I didn't want precedent. I wanted them to look me in the eye and know they couldn't erase me. But I nodded. Back inside, they tried to act like nothing had happened. Nurse Jaime offered me pudding with lunch. The administrator stopped by just to check in. And a new maintenance worker came in and silently installed a sprinkler in my room. Too late. I stared at it like a ghost. It didn't change the fact that for months I'd slept in a room designed for ashes. The moment the worker left, I snapped a picture of the ceiling before and after. Time-stamped. Clear. Documented. Then I wrote in my journal, "They're fixing it now. Not because they care, but because they're afraid I lived." Susan filed the legal paperwork the following week. Not just for me, but as a class action. 3 other residents joined after hearing my story. Ruth, Esther, and a quiet man named Paul who hadn't spoken in weeks, but suddenly remembered the night a nurse told him, "You're in God's hands now." We weren't in God's hands. We were in their hands, and they dropped us. Things changed at Meadow Lane. Some residents were moved for safety upgrades. Staff shifted schedules. Suddenly there were drills again, real ones. Not the scheduled safety simulations we used to sit out like children in timeout. The administrator took an unexpected leave. No one replaced him. The board released a statement filled with lawyer-washed phrases like unfortunate oversight and re-evaluating infrastructure equity. But the press wasn't satisfied. Because Susan made sure the media knew, she sent them quotes, data, even a few of my photos. And one night, as I lay in bed now under a brand new sprinkler head, I heard the anchor say, "Investigative reports suggest some nursing home facilities may prioritize safety upgrades based on projected life expectancy, leaving vulnerable residents in harm's way." One survivor, Mildred Whitaker, says she's lucky to be alive. But she's not staying quiet. My name. On the news. Not in an obituary. In a story. The next morning, I wheeled out into the hallway and found a flower taped to my door. Not from family. From Ruth. No note. Just a marigold. Bright. Defiant. Like us. And though no one said it out loud, the mood in the facility had changed. Residents looked each other in the eye more. They asked questions. They compared notes. And when a new woman, Judith, moved into room 309, I made sure she knew. "Check your ceiling. And if something feels wrong, speak up. You matter here." Because now they couldn't pretend we didn't. The fire might have been contained in the kitchen, but the blaze it sparked in me, that was only beginning to spread. The lawsuit picked up momentum. Susan kept me in the loop. Her emails came every few days, short but sharp, like well-aimed darts. She told me the discovery process had begun. That meant documents, communications protocols, and secrets. One night she called Rare for her and said, "They deleted records, Mildred, but we found backups on a misconfigured server." Their entire room prioritization system was real. Code names, spreadsheet scores, internal memos. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to, she continued. They called it Project Sunset. I nearly dropped the phone. It sounded almost poetic until you realized what it meant. Sunset. As in, end of life. As in, less urgent to protect. As in, let the sun set quietly and move on. I hung up and stared at the sprinkler above me. For the first time, I saw it not as safety, but as an apology installed too late. The next week, things escalated. The Meadow Lane board hired a PR firm. Fancy posters appeared in the hallways with smiling elderly folks and slogans like dignity in every detail. New uniforms for the staff. Lemon water in the waiting area. But it was all surface. Residents still whispered about the ones who left, about the ones who hadn't spoken up in time, about the ones who'd passed away before the upgrades reached their wings. We didn't even get a fire drill before this week, Paul told me during lunch. 3 years I've been here. Eloise leaned in. They always said we'd be fine in our rooms. But I heard that if the smoke reaches the lower vents, we'd suffocate in minutes. I looked around the table, faces lined with years' voices once too soft to matter. Now they were clear, strong, angry, and they had every right to be. Because here's the truth. They didn't just deny us safety. They denied us the right to survival. A few nights later, I received an envelope under my door. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, black and white, grainy. It was the Meadow Lane maintenance log, a spreadsheet with room numbers, safety statuses, and handwritten notes. My room 312B was marked sprinkler omitted, DNR status assumed. I don't have a DNR, never signed one, never even discussed it. But someone had assumed it. And on that assumption, someone decided I didn't need to be saved. I looked at that word omitted for a long time. It didn't just mean excluded. It meant erased. The next day, Susan visited again. She brought coffee and something I hadn't expected. A printed legal complaint. My name was bolded in the first paragraph. Lead plaintiff, she said. I read every line slowly. Negligence. Discrimination. Failure to provide equal protection under state eldercare law. Punitive damages sought. But what hit me hardest was the fourth page, the part where they outlined what we were asking for. Not just money. Reform. Mandatory sprinkler installation for all eldercare residents regardless of age or mobility. Equal emergency response training. Independent audit rights for residents and families. And a clause requiring that no facility could ever again use life expectancy as a factor in safety infrastructure. My hands trembled. It wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who came after. The media requests started flooding in. Local papers, advocacy blogs, even a segment on a national morning show. They wanted to speak to the woman who wouldn't die quietly. Susan advised me to wait until after our first hearing. I agreed. But I wrote something anyway, a statement, for the court, for the press, for anyone who would ever think old meant disposable. It started like this. My name is Mildred Whitaker. I am not a number on a spreadsheet. I am not a fading candle to be snuffed when convenient. I survived not because they protected me, but because I refused to be forgotten. I read it aloud to Ruth. She cried. Paul asked for a copy to send to his daughter. Even Eloise, who once said her family wouldn't believe her, whispered, "This makes me feel real again." Then the date arrived. Our first hearing. I wore a green blouse, same one I wore to my husband's memorial. It made me feel strong, present, alive. Susan wheeled me into the courtroom head high. The Meadow Lane lawyers tried to look calm, but I saw the worry behind their expensive smiles. And when I read my statement aloud, voice, steady hands unshaking the courtroom went silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Because truth, when it's told with dignity, has weight. Because sometimes the weakest voices are the ones that hit the hardest. The hearing ended with no ruling that day. But everyone in that courtroom knew something irreversible had happened. They'd expected a frail woman with a cane and a complaint. What they got was a force of nature. A woman who looked them in the eye and made them confront what they'd buried under cost-benefit analysis and euphemisms like facility protocol. Afterward, a younger man in a charcoal suit, someone from the defense team, approached me in the hallway. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitaker, may I say something?" Susan stepped forward protectively, but I nodded. He hesitated. "My grandmother died in a place like this 2 years ago. I didn't ask questions then. I should have." Then he walked away. He didn't say sorry, but sometimes silence is a better confession than words. Back at Meadow Lane, the mood had shifted again. I could feel it in the way nurses avoided eye contact. In the way the new administrator, a woman named Cheryl, took over morning announcements and used words like transparency and accountability like they were bandages. They even called a town hall meeting. Every resident invited. Families too. They set up folding chairs in the cafeteria, gave out cookies and bottled water like it was a party. But when Cheryl stepped up to the mic, she looked straight at me. "We failed," she said, voice catching. "And I can't undo that. But we are going to change." A part of me wanted to believe her. Another part of me looked at the emergency exit still jammed with a folding tray. No one else noticed. But I did. Because when you've been left behind once, your eyes never stop checking the exits. Susan was relentless. The documents kept coming. Memos between board members discussing cost efficiency through natural attrition. Emails where nurses had requested extra equipment for certain rooms and were told, "Not necessary at this stage." One file buried in a compressed zip folder included internal notes about residents who asked too many questions. My name was on it. Beside it, close monitoring recommended. Highly articulate. Media risk. It was the first time in years anyone had described me as a risk. And strangely, it made me proud. I began keeping a list, not of names but of words, the ones they used to hide the truth. Low priority rooms, end stage residents, expected transition, natural fade, do not escalate. Every one of those phrases meant, we didn't think they'd matter long enough to save. I started writing a letter to the families of those who didn't make it, to the daughters who got a call too late, to the sons who blamed themselves for choosing the wrong facility, to the siblings who never questioned the silence. It began. They didn't die of old age. They died of assumptions. Outside the courtroom, things were moving too. The press kept calling. A journalist from the New York Times wanted to write a feature. Susan thought it would help the case. "Only if they don't sanitize me," I said. "I want every word they used. I want people to feel it in their teeth." She smiled. "Then we'll give them the unedited version." Weeks passed, then months. The case dragged through motions and red tape. But it never stopped. Because we never stopped, and something else was happening now. Something Susan hadn't expected. Other facilities began quietly fixing things. Sprinklers went up. Old wings got alarms. Dozens of reports started appearing on watchdog sites, whistleblowers citing the Whitaker precedent. It wasn't a law yet, but it was pressure. And pressure applied long enough reshapes everything. One morning, a nurse named Carlene, quiet, thoughtful, slipped a note into my cardigan pocket as she adjusted my pillow. Later, I unfolded it. The handwriting was small. "My mother is in a place like this too. She's in the Red Wing." I checked her ceiling. "It's blank. Thank you." That night, I sat by my window watching the moonlight hit the now shiny sprinkler above my head. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't justice. But it was a crack in the system. And cracks, when they spread far enough, can bring down walls. Especially the ones built to silence us. The trial date was set. Not just hearings anymore. The trial. The part where stories stopped being whispers and became testimony. Susan came to my room 3 days before. "They'll try to settle," she said. "They'll try to buy us off." She nodded. "They'll dress it up as a resolution in good faith. It'll sound like healing, but it's just silence with a check stapled to it." I looked at the envelope she placed on the table. A draft of the offer. The number printed in bold. Enough money to move into any facility in the state. Enough for private care, a suite, even live-in help. But still not enough, because they hadn't lost a room. They'd almost cost me my life, and they'd already cost others theirs. "Tell them no," I said. Susan didn't argue. She never did when I used that voice. The same one I used when I suspended the superintendent's nephew for cheating, or when I walked into a PTA meeting and dismantled their assumptions with a chalkboard and a list of names. That voice had returned now, hoarse, sure but unshakable. Word of the trial spread faster than wildfire. Reporters set up outside the courthouse days in advance. And in the facility, something strange happened. The residents held a rally, a real one. Paul painted signs with crooked letters. Eloise wore a t-shirt someone's granddaughter made that said, "I'm not disposable." Even Ruth stood up, walker in hand, and read my statement aloud in the dining hall while others applauded. It wasn't just about the fire anymore. It was about dignity, about the simple truth that growing old didn't mean fading away. On the day of the trial, I wore navy, a color that didn't beg for sympathy, one that looked like strength. The courtroom was full, some from the facility, some from other homes, a few family members, journalists, advocacy groups, even a congresswoman silent in the back row. When the judge entered, the room shifted, tension thick as dust, and then Susan began. She spoke clearly, slowly, like she wanted every syllable to cut into the silence. "We are not here today because of a broken alarm. We are here because of a broken system. One that decided who deserved to survive and who didn't, based on a spreadsheet." She paused, then looked at me. "Let Mrs. Whitaker speak." The room turned toward me. I stood not just for drama, but because sitting in that moment felt like shrinking. And I began. "My name is Mildred Whitaker. I was placed in room 312B. That room had no sprinkler, no working alarm, and for far too long, no value in the eyes of those who were paid to protect me." I paused, let the words settle. When the fire came, I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I moved. I saved another resident. I documented everything. And I survived not because the system worked, but because I knew what it meant to be overlooked. The judge listened without blinking. Some of the staff, the ones still employed, looked away. But one nurse cried. I saw it. I finished. This trial isn't just about me. It's about the quiet rooms, the forgotten hallways, the people deemed too old to save. It's about making sure no one ever again writes. Sprinkler omitted. DNR assumed. Silence. Real, breathless silence. Until the judge cleared his throat and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." No objections. No cross-examination. Not that day. Later, outside the courtroom, I saw them. 3 women I didn't recognize, each holding framed photos. One photo was a man smiling with a birthday cake. Another was a woman knitting beside a window. The third, a couple holding hands in matching robes. Their relatives. The ones who hadn't made it. One of them stepped forward. "We saw your interview," she said. "We didn't know what happened to them. Not really. But now, we do." I touched the photo gently. "He mattered," I whispered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "So do you?" That night, back in my room, I opened my journal. I hadn't written in it since the trial began. On the first line of a fresh page, I wrote, "I am not the exception. I am the example." Because if it could happen to me, it had happened to others. But now it would stop. Because truth once spoken in the right room doesn't die quietly. It echoes and burns. The next morning, they called an emergency meeting at Meadow Lane. Not with the residents, with the staff. But word travels, especially when your night nurse Tanya slips you a copy of the memo. Typed in corporate passive voice, it read, "Pending legal proceedings and media coverage have prompted a temporary re-evaluation of existing care infrastructure. Staff are expected to exercise discretion when discussing facility history with residents or outside parties." Discretion. Their favorite word for don't talk, don't tell, don't admit. But outside those walls, talking had already started. The article in the Times came out that weekend. Burned by neglect. One woman's fight to prove her life still mattered. They ran it with a photo. Not of me in a wheelchair, not of me under the sprinkler, but one Susan had taken weeks earlier of me seated at the courtyard garden reading under a tree. I looked alive, not frail, not fading, whole. Letters started arriving, dozens, then hundreds, some handwritten in shaky cursive from people in homes just like mine. Others typed by grandchildren thanking me for making them think twice before choosing a facility for their loved one. One girl, 13, sent a drawing of me with a superhero cape. The caption, "Miss Mildred saves everyone." I cried when I opened it. Not from pride, but from grief. Because I shouldn't have had to save anyone. We should have been safe already. Back in court, the trial pressed on. Cross-examinations, objections, charts projected on overhead screens. But none of it shook me like what happened on day 14. A woman I didn't know was called as a surprise witness. Her name was Maureen Caldwell. She'd been the facility's compliance officer at Meadow Lane until 2 years ago. She was fired, she said, after raising concerns about the emergency protocols. I was told, she said, voice trembling, that certain upgrades were deferred indefinitely based on cost and residency outlook. T. Was that term in official documentation? Susan asked. Yes, she replied. We were instructed to label wings by R. O. Scores how likely the residents were to remain 6 months or longer. If they scored low, they were moved to the bottom of the maintenance queue. She glanced toward me. And Mildred Whitaker's room. It wasn't just low on the list. It was flagged. Flagged for what? Maureen swallowed hard. Flagged as non-essential in fire reallocation scenarios, meaning, if there was a fire and resources were limited, her wing wouldn't be cleared first. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Someone dropped a pen. Susan's next words landed like thunder. You're saying she was officially deprioritized for rescue before the fire even happened? Yes, Maureen said. On paper. After court recessed, Maureen approached me. She looked down, embarrassed. I should have spoken out sooner. I was afraid. I took her hand. You spoke now. That's what matters. She nodded, eyes wet. There's more, she whispered. Other facilities use the same model. Not just here. Not just this company. I didn't blink, because part of me already knew. This wasn't just a Meadow Lane problem. It was systemic. And rot, when left untreated, spreads. Susan and I went back to the facility that night, unusually quiet. No bingo, no TV chatter, just silence. But not the same silence as before. This one was expectant, watchful. Awake! Ruth met us in the hallway. They're afraid, she said. I smiled. They should be. The next day, I gave an interview to a major news network. They asked me what I'd say to other elderly people afraid to speak up. I looked straight into the camera and said, they count on your silence. They build their comfort on your quiet. But you have the right to rage. And if they call it inconvenient, tell them, so is dying in a fire while they check a spreadsheet. Later, I walked the halls again. Sprinklers now in every room. Emergency lights tested weekly. Evacuation drills held monthly and real this time. No simulations. No skipping wings. But more importantly, residents had begun forming a council, a real one, with votes, minutes, and the right to review safety reports. They called it the Whitaker Committee. I tried to tell them not to. They insisted. We need the reminder, Paul said, of what happens when we're quiet. Of what happens when you weren't. I said thank you. But what I really wanted to say was, I shouldn't be the reminder. We all should be. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. 5 hours of pacing, waiting, and holding breath like it was currency we couldn't afford to spend. The courtroom was silent when they returned. I gripped the arms of my chair, fingers stiff from age and something older than age, anticipation sharpened by survival. The foreperson stood, young, maybe early 30s, eyes steady. He read the verdict with the kind of clarity that slices through doubt. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Mildred Whitaker, and the class represented. The rest blurred. Something inside me loosened. My body didn't collapse, but something uncoiled the way a rope does when you realize you're no longer being dragged by it. Susan squeezed my hand. Hard. There were damages awarded. Compensatory and punitive. More than any of us expected. But it wasn't the money that silenced the room. It was the second half of the verdict. A mandated overhaul. The court ordered Meadow Lane and any sister facility under its parent company to submit to third-party audits, publicly publish safety compliance scores, and remove all forms of residency expectancy from future operational policy. That had never been done before. Not anywhere in the country. Susan looked stunned. For once. We didn't just win, she said, breath-catching. We set a new floor. I whispered back. Then let's raise the ceiling. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps like ants to honey. Microphones, cameras, lights too bright for old eyes. I gave one short statement. That was all. I didn't survive, so others could still be ignored. This isn't just my story. It's theirs. The names we never knew because no one thought to ask. From now on, they'll matter. On paper, in action, in law. Then I went home. Not to Meadow Lane. To a new place. One I chose. One with windows wide enough to let in sky and policies written with human hands, not financial forecasts. But even there, I didn't stop. I helped Susan write an op-ed, spoke via Zoom to lawmakers about eldercare reform, testified remotely in a congressional subcommittee. One night, I got a call from a stranger, a woman named Deborah. My mother's facility, she said. They just installed a new fire suppression system. When I asked why, they said, because of Whitaker. Months passed. Then something unexpected. A letter arrived hand-delivered from the CEO of Meadow Lane's parent company. It was short. We failed you. We failed the people in our care. We failed our mandate as caretakers. We have dissolved the Senior Operations Board and restructured with safety-first leadership. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just hoping, you change something permanent. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. And sometimes for the invisible, that's everything. I returned to Meadow Lane once, many months later. The sign had changed. Now it read, Meadow Lane Recovery and Renewal Center. The recovery wasn't just for bodies. It was for trust. Inside, the walls were brighter. The ceilings had sensors. And on the second floor, a wall was painted with a mural, a tree with branches that carried names instead of leaves. Residents who fought, families who questioned, staff who spoke. And at the base of the trunk in small print, we rise not because we're loud, but because we refuse to disappear. I sat under it for a while. Ruth found me there. She sat beside me on a bench and passed me a cup of chamomile. They miss you, she said softly. Even the new ones talk about you. I smiled. I didn't want to be remembered. She looked at me. Too late. That night, I wrote in my journal, some fires burn homes, others burn systems. But the fiercest fire is the one inside a woman who's been told she doesn't count. I closed the book, not because the story ended, but because it had finally truly begun. You might think the fight ends after the verdict, but justice doesn't echo unless you carry it forward. And I wasn't done, not by a long shot. A week after the mural unveiling at Meadow Lane, I received an invitation from a university back east, gerontology department. They wanted me to speak at a symposium titled, The Value of a Life After 70. The irony didn't escape me. I replied with a single sentence, I'll come as long as I'm not used as a cautionary tale, but as a call to action. They agreed. So I packed my things carefully, slower than I once did, and boarded a plane for the first time in over a decade. My knees ached, and the security agent gave me a patronizing smile. But when I landed, someone held up a sign. Mildred Whittaker keynote. That alone was worth the trip. The auditorium was full. Students, nurses, policymakers, a few white-haired attendees with notepads and knowing looks, people who had lived lives before they were reduced to residents. When I walked on stage, there was polite applause. But I didn't speak right away. I stood there watching them, letting them get uncomfortable in the silence. Because silence, when held with purpose, has power. Then I began. I was nearly erased. Not by fire, but by paperwork. I was placed in a room without basic protections because someone assumed I wouldn't live long enough to matter. What saved me wasn't luck. It was awareness. And rage. I told them the truth. No softened edges. I showed them photos. Of the ceilings. The hallways. The memo with my room marked non-essential. I read the line about residency outlook. Then I closed the binder and said, if your job is care and you measure worth by probability, you're not in healthcare. You're in damage control. I didn't expect applause, but I got it. And after people came to shake my hand, some with tears, some with questions, some just stood quietly as if finally realizing the weight of the system they'd been a part of or complicit in. One young woman, a nursing student, said, I've been taught to treat every patient equally. I smiled at her, kindly. And what will you do, I asked, when the budget tells you not to? She didn't answer, but her eyes said everything. I returned home to a letter from Susan. She was working on legislation now. The Whitaker bill aimed at banning resource allocation policies based on age or life expectancy in long-term care facilities. It wasn't federal yet, but the state was listening. Change is slow, but so is rot. And if rot can spread silently, then so can justice if you plant it deep enough. Paul passed away quietly the next month, in his sleep, peaceful. His daughter sent me a letter. He always said he wanted to go with a clear conscience. You helped him find that. She included a photo. He was holding a newspaper verdict in Meadow Lane trial. Residents win landmark case. Even in death, he looked proud. I pinned it on my wall. Ruth had her 84th birthday in the new community garden. The staff wheeled out cupcakes. Her great-granddaughter, a teenager with a camera and quiet eyes, took photos. Ruth raised a paper cup and toasted me from across the lawn. "We live louder now," she said, smiling. I nodded. Yes, yes, we do. That night, I sat on my new porch wrapped in a knitted shawl someone had left anonymously with a card. For the woman who refused to fade. The stars were bright. The wind was soft. And for once, there were no alarms, no blinking red lights, no smoke curling beneath the door. Just quiet. But this time, it wasn't the silence of erasure. It was the kind that comes after battle, full of memory, weight, and breath. I closed my eyes and whispered to the night. You don't get to decide when I'm finished. Because I wasn't. Not yet. Weeks later, a brown envelope arrived, hand-addressed and sealed with a real wax stamp, the kind you don't see anymore unless someone's trying to send meaning with their message. Inside was a formal letter from the National Alliance for Elder Care Reform. They were honoring me with a Lifetime Advocacy Award. It felt strange. Not because I wasn't honored, but because lifetime sounded like something they thought I was at the end of. I wasn't done living. I wasn't done fighting. And most of all, I wasn't done speaking. I accepted the invitation and wrote a short speech, then tore it up and wrote another, because if they were going to celebrate me, they needed to hear the truth. The version not filtered through legal jargon or press sound bites. At the ceremony, I was wheeled onto a modest stage in a hotel ballroom. There was wine and linen and polite nods. A room full of people who'd read about me. Some of them expected inspiration. What I gave them was a storm. Don't give me an award because you think I'm rare. I am not rare. I am what happens when a system underestimates someone long enough for them to gather evidence. I am what happens when a woman with nothing to lose decides to write everything down. The applause afterward was hesitant, but there were some who stood. I saw them, the aides, the quiet ones at the back with name badges and tired shoulders. The ones who knew the inside of these places better than the people designing them. They were the future, and I needed them to understand that our fight wasn't over. It had just shifted forms. Back home, I received a voicemail from someone I hadn't heard from in years. My son, David. The voice was cautious, softer than I remembered. Hi, Mom. I saw your interview. I read the article. I didn't realize. I should have called sooner. If you're willing, I'd like to visit. I stared at the phone for a long time. Then I pressed delete. Not because I didn't want him back, but because I didn't want pity to be the bridge he used to reach me. If he called again and he meant it, I'd answer. But he needed to try harder than that. Meanwhile, Susan called with news. The Whitaker bill had passed its first committee vote. She was flying to D.C. next month to present findings to a Senate subcommittee on aging. Do you want to come? She asked. I laughed. Are they ready for me? They're not, she said. Which is why you have to come. At the airport, someone recognized me. A flight attendant in her 20s with lavender eyeshadow and silver braids. You're the fire lady, she whispered. My grandma keeps your article taped to her fridge. I smiled. Then tell your grandma she's why I did it. On Capitol Hill, I sat in front of a panel of lawmakers who wore tired suits and practiced concern. I read my statement slowly, calmly, but when I got to this part, my voice sharpened. Do not tell me the system failed. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. Maximize profit, minimize complaint, outlast resistance. What failed was your assumption that none of us would notice. Someone at the back stood and applauded, then another. By the time I finished, the room was half standing. The other half looked deeply uncomfortable. That was exactly what I wanted. Back at the new facility I now called home, not Meadow Lane, but a co-op-style residence run by a group of nurses and former patients. I started teaching a workshop every Thursday. Not knitting, not gardening, but documentation for self-defense. I taught residents how to photograph their rooms, log missed medications, request their charts. Know the law, I called it. Don't just live witness. The flyer said, they're counting on your forgetfulness. Let's make sure they regret it. I thought maybe I'd become tired of the fight, but truthfully, I'd never felt more alive. Because every time someone whispered I didn't know we were allowed to ask that, I got a little stronger. Every time a woman picked up her phone and filmed a neglectful moment, I knew we were building something, not a revolution of fire, but of record, because what can't be denied can't be buried. Not anymore. Autumn settled like a shawl across the shoulders of the town. Gold and rust-colored leaves danced across sidewalks, and I found myself sitting more often near the garden's edge, watching them fall with a kind of reverence. It reminded me of something my husband once said years before his heart gave out over breakfast. When leaves fall, they're not dying. They're letting go of what no longer feeds them. That's what I was learning now. To let go of what didn't nourish me anymore. The fear, the silence, the belief that being old meant being irrelevant. I had begun receiving letters from students not just in medicine or law, but in architecture policy, even ethics. They were designing better buildings, better laws, better questions, all because of a single room without a sprinkler. One wrote, "Your room made me realize my thesis wasn't about fire safety. It was about who we design for and who we don't." Another said, "I thought I was writing code for elder care monitoring. But now I want to make it impossible for silence to be part of the system." I taped those letters to the inside of my closet door, not to display, to remember, because when they tell you old age is just about remembering what was they forget, it can also be about remembering what could have been if someone like you hadn't said anything. Meadow Lane changed its name again. They invited me to their rededication ceremony. I said no. Some invitations are more about optics than sincerity. But I sent a letter, short handwritten. If your new name reflects new values, I'm glad. But remember paint peels. Integrity doesn't. I never received a reply. That was fine. The silence told me everything. Susan called to say the Whitaker bill had passed the Senate subcommittee with bipartisan support. "This never happens," she said. "You're a unifier, Mildred." I laughed. "I'm a woman who almost burned to death in a room no one thought to protect." "That's all." "Exactly," she said. "And that's why they're listening." She was tired, I could hear it in her voice. But it was the kind of tired that carried satisfaction. She had fought for me, and now I was fighting for others. We were a chain, not a protest. A legacy. The co-op where I now lived had begun partnering with local students, nursing interns, safety officers in training, even creative writers. They shadowed us, the residents, and listened to our stories. Sometimes I'd find a teenager sitting beside Ruth scribbling in a notebook while she described the day she married her late husband at 19 during a thunderstorm. Sometimes they came to me. "Tell us about the sprinkler," they'd say. I'd lean in, smile, and reply, "It wasn't about the sprinkler. It was about what they didn't bother to build, because they didn't think we'd live long enough to notice." That always made them quiet. The good kind of quiet. The kind that says, "I'll never forget this." One evening after my workshop, a woman named Lillian approached me. She was new hair in tight silver curls, eyes too sharp for the slow rhythm of the home. She said, "I used to teach law. They forced me into retirement after I turned 70. "Let me guess," I replied. "But you still win arguments at dinner." She smiled. Then she leaned close. "I want to help you. Not just this home, but others. There are places worse than Meadow Lane. Hidden. Remote. Underfunded. Nobody's watching." I looked at her hands, trembling but steady enough to still carry fire. "Then let's watch," I said. We started collecting reports, letters, anonymous tips, photos. We called it the Registry of the Forgotten, a public database open to all. Names of facilities, infractions, policies, scores, stories, verified, documented, and written in the voices of the people who lived through it. It grew faster than we expected, not because we were popular, but because people were waiting to be seen. That winter, a small local paper interviewed me again. The final question was simple. What do you want to be remembered for? I thought for a long time, then said, I don't care if they remember my name. I care if one day a woman in a wheelchair presses a call button and someone comes the first time. That's all. That's everything. The journalist nodded quietly, wiping her eyes. She was younger than my granddaughter, but she understood. Because this fight, it's not about me. It's not even about the fire anymore. It's about the idea that you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to refuse to be silenced. Spring arrived with no announcement, just the slow unfurling of petals and the soft hum of bees. At our co-op, the residents began tending the garden again. It was therapeutic, they said. Something about pulling weeds made the world feel a little more orderly. I didn't kneel in the dirt anymore. My joints wouldn't allow it. But I sat by the window and wrote. Pages and pages, not memoirs, manuals. One of them was titled, What to Ask Before You Sign. Another, Emergency Preparedness for Those They Assume Can't Run. We printed them in large font, spiral-bound them, and mailed copies to every long-term care facility in the state. Then we put PDFs online free for anyone. People started writing back. We used your checklist and found 6 violations. My aunt refused the wrong facility because of your guide. We brought your manual to a meeting. The director didn't know how to answer half the questions. It felt small at first, but small things when done persistently become unignorable. That's how this all started after all, with one missing sprinkler. A new resident moved in around that time, June, a retired seamstress with a knack for remembering birthdays and spotting lies. She had a cane that looked like it had been carved from driftwood and eyes that could slice through granite. She knocked on my door one evening. I read about you, she said. I nodded. I want in. In. Whatever you're building, she said. Whatever fight is coming next. I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that felt like taking off a heavy coat. We weren't a formal organization. We didn't have a name, but we had a rhythm now. Every Wednesday we met in the sunroom. Me, Lillian, June, Ruth, and a few others. We reviewed emails, sorted reports, strategized. Someone called us the League of Noisy Women. We accepted it. Noisy, not because we shouted, but because we refused to be ignored. We drafted letters to state regulators, petitioned for the public release of fire inspection reports, taught families how to request full medical records for their loved ones. We didn't just react. We anticipated, because now we knew how the system worked. And once you see the architecture of injustice, you stop being a bystander. You start bringing a hammer. One night, I received a letter in thick, gold-edged stationery. I almost didn't open it. Inside, a handwritten note from a woman in another state. My mother died in a care home last year. I asked too late. They told me the alarm malfunctioned. I never believed them. Then I read your story. Thank you for confirming what I felt in my bones. I wasn't crazy. They just wanted me to stay quiet. I sat with that sentence for a long time. They just wanted me to stay quiet. That's how it always starts, with silence. A few weeks later, Susan called, breathless. It passed, she said. The full state legislature, unanimously. The Whitaker bill. Yes, it's law now. I closed my eyes. Not to escape, but to feel every second of that moment press into my skin. It was done. A law, a real one, not a promise, not a plaque, not a mural. A rule with consequences. The next time someone tries to skip a sprinkler, they won't just face a court. They'll face precedent. I told Ruth at breakfast. She nearly dropped her spoon. I didn't think we'd live to see it. We didn't just live, I said. We witnessed. We held a celebration that night. No confetti, just pie. Eloise played the piano. June baked something with rhubarb. The young nurse assistants decorated with paper stars and wrote, Justice looks like you, Mildred, on the community whiteboard. I corrected it after everyone went to bed. I erased my name and wrote, Justice looks like us. Because it did. Because it had to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling. At the perfectly installed sprinkler now 5 years old. Silent. Waiting. A symbol of what nearly destroyed me. and what had come to define my fight. I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for the women in other rooms, still waiting for the world to notice they exist, still pressing their call buttons in the dark, still being told to be patient, to be nice, to be quiet. I whispered into the darkness, "Hold on, we're coming." The next morning, June handed me a newspaper clipping. Front page. Not ours, someone else's. An elder care facility in Arizona had just been fined $500,000 for code violations. The headline read, "No sprinklers, no justice until now." The article cited the Whitaker Law, and for the first time in print I saw the words, "Inspired by the advocacy of Mildred Whitaker and the survivors of the Meadow Lane fire." I traced the letters slowly, not out of vanity, out of disbelief, because I remembered the moment I first realized my ceiling was blank. I remembered the silence when no one came. I remembered thinking I wouldn't make it. And now my name had become a reason others would. The co-op hosted a regional eldercare summit that month. We called it the Age of Reckoning. Not subtle. That was the point. We invited activists, legal experts, whistleblowers, even a few regretful administrators. To their credit, they came. Not all of them defensive. Some ready to listen. Some ready to change. One man, early 60s, a former regional director for a corporate chain, stood up and said I followed the model. I implemented those room ranking systems. I didn't question it. Now I can't sleep. Ruth leaned over and whispered, "Guilt ages you fast." She wasn't wrong. Susan flew in for the keynote. She looked more tired than usual, gray threading her hair now, voice a little hoarse. But her fire, still there. She stood before the crowd and told our story. But this time she framed it differently. This isn't just a legal victory. It's a cultural reckoning. For too long we've treated our elders like expired products. Mildred didn't just survive a fire. She made the smoke visible to everyone else. The room stood when she finished. Even the skeptics. Even the ones who thought we were just sentimental. Because there's something undeniably powerful about a truth wrapped in flames and told by someone who walked through them. After the summit, we received funding for the Registry of the Forgotten. It was now officially a nonprofit. We hired 2 young researchers, created a hotline, built a searchable map of all recorded violations. Families started calling in droves. They didn't want revenge. They wanted answers. And we gave them. Not all were easy, but they were real. Then came the invitation I never expected. A congressional committee on elder infrastructure and emergency preparedness wanted me to speak again, this time not as a witness, as an advisor. I read the email 5 times. Then I printed it and pinned it next to my granddaughter's crayon drawing of me as a fire hero. And I thought, this is what legacy looks like when it's earned 1 hard inch at a time. The night before the flight, I walked the co-op halls one more time. Not because I was nervous, because I was remembering every hallway I had wheeled through in silence. Every face I had passed when I didn't know if I'd see the sun again. Every nurse who once looked through me. Every aide who now looked up to me. In the reflection of the window at the end of the corridor, I saw myself older, slower, but still standing, still moving, still unburned. On the plane, a flight attendant asked if I needed help buckling in. I told her gently I helped pass a national law last month. "I think I can handle the seatbelt." She blinked, then smiled. "Would you like a window seat, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "I want to see how far I've come." In D.C., the capital loomed like history itself. And I realized something. I had once been afraid to speak up in a hallway. Now I was about to speak to a room of senators. And I didn't feel small anymore. I felt rooted, not in defiance, in truth. When they handed me the microphone, I didn't hesitate. "My name is Mildred Whitaker. I was placed in a room without a sprinkler because someone thought I wouldn't make it long enough to care. That mistake nearly cost me my life. It changed everything about how I see aging. I'm not here to ask for protection. I'm here to make sure you never again design a system where silence equals safety." I looked up, held their gaze. "We are not your past. We are your future. Treat us like it." And for once, the silence that followed wasn't dismissal. It was respect. They called it the Whitaker Standard. A federal committee adopted it a year later, backed by bipartisan support. It mandated equal fire protection standards across all federally funded elder care facilities, banning policies based on projected life expectancy or non-rescue zones. My name was printed in the document's dedication, not because I asked, but because the nation needed to remember the price of inaction. Back at the co-op, life continued in quieter ways. June organized a poetry reading night. Ruth started mentoring a young nurse named Camila, who'd once confessed she'd only taken the job for stable hours until she met us. And me, I started sleeping better. No alarms, no flames in dreams. Only the ticking clock by my bed and the soft whir of a ceiling fan, not a sprinkler this time, but one I'd chosen. That mattered. Choice matters. My son David visited again. The third time, he brought lemon bars. Store-bought, but still. We sat on the porch and didn't speak for 20 minutes. Sometimes grief is best acknowledged in silence. Then he said, "I don't deserve to be your son." I turned to him. "You're wrong," I said. "You didn't show up when I was in danger." "That's true. But you're here now. And here matters too." He nodded, his eyes wet. His hand trembled as it reached for mine. This wasn't reconciliation. It was re-entry. And that's enough for a beginning. On my 81st birthday, the co-op threw a party. Not the surprise kind I told them. If I walked into another room filled with balloons, I'd fake a heart attack and ruin everyone's cake. So we had music instead. Live jazz. Someone wheeled in a piano and Ruth sang. Her voice was soft, but strong, like cracked porcelain lit from within. Afterward, June handed me a bound book. A copy of the new resident training manual used in 3 states. Inside the front cover, dedicated to Mildred Whittaker, who taught us how to make systems humane again. I ran my fingers along the paper, not because it was fancy, because it was proof. That words on paper, when used right, could protect people the way sprinklers never did in my first room. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I opened my journal one last time, the same one where I had written years ago. They're fixing it now, not because they care, but because they're afraid I lived. I turned the page, wrote a new line. They change it now, not because they fear me, but because they finally saw me. And I closed the book, not in finality, in fulfillment. We live in a country that has long taught us to revere youth and discard age like bruised fruit. But I am not bruised. I am weathered. I am witnessed. And I am no longer willing to be the quiet room at the end of the hallway. To those still sitting in silence, press the button, ask the question, take the picture, call your children or call a lawyer, whatever makes them remember you're alive, because you are. They called my story a cautionary tale, but I never wanted to be a warning. I wanted to be a wall. No one forgets to build again. And if I've done that even once, even somewhere far away in a room I'll never see, then everything that nearly ended me was worth surviving. Word count. In 109. Final epilogue, 300 words. Years later, the name Mildred Whittaker showed up in textbooks. Not under a photo, but under case studies. I became a precedent, a chapter, and in some ways a symbol. But symbols can be misread. Let me set the record straight. I wasn't brave every day. Some days I was tired, bitter, afraid. But I never stopped asking, why was I less protected? And that one question whispered in a smoky room turned into a movement no one could silence. Not with payouts, not with policy, not with plaques. Change didn't come because I was special. It came because I was persistent, and because I lived to tell it. Now it's your turn. If you're hearing this and you think you're too small, too old, too forgotten, remember, they almost left me to die in the dark. I became a law, a movement, a warning, a promise. So the next time someone tells you that you matter less because of your age, your silence, or your status, smile, like you've got a fireproof ceiling above you, and whisper back, you should have installed the sprinkler, because this time, we're ready.